Yeah, I lost my slide. 1 minute. Okay, so Sabina Spielrein. For me, she represents completely different comprehension of what is subject, what is human subject. And I would claim that it's feminist, more feminist comprehension of a subject, because if in Freud and the subject, the way we know it, the subject, the normal subject we talk about when we discuss it scientifically, like the neutral human being, the neutral subject, the way it's represented in science and economics, human being as such, it's still quite male-centered, and in its neutrality. It's or in evolutionary studies, when a subject is the one who is aimed at their own survival, the one who has egoistic interest, and it's first of all, it's a life subject, and it's self-centered. In Sabina Spielrein, with her concept of a death drive, which she introduces before Freud, and Freud would later try to appropriate, but kind of fails, through trying to appropriate it, losing the very meaning of what is a death drive. So Spielrein, human being, the one she implies, or the way I see it, is different subject, is not that much alive. It's barely existing. It's not self-centered. It's not concentrated on itself. It's not even properly individualized. It's not existed as separate being, and it's approaching its own destruction. And if for Freud it's egoistic, the subject is egoistic, meaning is the subject of the pursuit of pleasure, who wants to survive, who wants pleasure. For in Spielrein, it would rather be loving or sacrificing subject, instead of a subject who is in search of pleasure. The one who loves, instead of appropriating, instead of satisfying desires or something like that. So completely different comprehension of what is subject. And for me, this is more aligned, like Freudian comprehension of a subject, and it's obvious that it's male-centered comprehension. And in Spielrein, I think we can see more subject as a woman, or maybe because she is a woman talking about the subject. At least if we don't want to be essentialist here, we can talk about just properties of a subject that are associated with women, not the one that women express, but historically aligns with femininity. And I was trying to make a picture of what is Freudian subject and how it's different from Spielreinian subject. So for Freudian subject, it's easy. You can just use we can just use male symbol the way it's represented in like standard in biology, where in biology where it was the sign that means Mars, which was taken from Greek, from Roman mythology, and Mars as also god of war, representing all the male qualities like masculinity, virility, straight. So it's not that what the subject means. It's kind of useful for me how I see to simplify Freudian comprehension of a subject and subject neutral subject. This sign is useful because of this arrow and because of the circle. Like for Freud, subject and subject as such, not only in Freud, it's just Freud takes this subject without questioning it, and it's still the subject, substantially a subject of psychoanalysis, subject of psychology. When we talk about human being in psychological discourse, scientific discourse, psychoanalytic discourse, this is the sign. For me, it means that why it's useful here, because for me, it means that subject is first its circle. It has its boundaries. It's self-enclosed. It has border, and it's separated from other similar circles. Then it has a desire. This probably means what stands for penis, because it's reaching outside of itself. It has a desire, and the arrow can mean this the direction of desire, which also symbolically means, well, not only symbolically, but the way subject is comprehended is that it's separated from other, this circle, and not intervened with other. There is the object of desire outside of the subject, and this is what drives subject to satisfy the desire, and desire is inside of the subject. And the object of desire, which can be woman, is appropriated. It's outside of the subject, is appropriated to satisfy the egoistic needs of the subject. Or in feminist theology, Mary Daly, for example, would criticize the idea of male-centered theology, talking about the idea of erection and the whole idea of elevating from this earthly existence to spiritual existence, the idea that it's outside of this dimension of existence, and there's supposed to be some accomplishment, something done to reach this kind of the spiritual existence. It's quite male-centered. And for Mary Daly, feminist theology would talk about female theology as completely different process from this elevating somewhere or conquering something or accomplishing something. It's like completely feminist position could be seen as something completely different. So, and this is the subject as we know in Freud and subject as we know in psychoanalysis. Well, if we dig deeper in Spielrein, the subject she suggests, which I claim it can be seen as a feminine subject, unlike Freud, masculine subject, it's completely different. And I wouldn't use Venus, the standard female symbol here. I just use something. I don't know how to draw it because it's impossible. This is just something. It's just to show that it's completely different from this one. It's not, let's be negative here and just say what it's not. So it's not like this subject, meaning that it doesn't have its boundaries. It's not self-enclosed or self-centered. It doesn't exist as separated from other subjects. It doesn't exist as self-enclosed subject that is striving somewhere to satisfy, that has a desire and is driven with this desire to satisfy this desire through appropriating something outside of the self. It has Spielrein subject, the death-driven subject has no intention of appropriation, so it's not the drive within the subject that drives subject somewhere, and there are no objects of desire that are used to satisfy. This process is absent, or maybe if it's present, it's quite secondary thing for the basic subject of Spielrein. So it's not separated, it's not circle. There is no arrow reaching out outside. It's barely existing, it's disappearing, and it's just in comparison with this one is the opposite. So Venus wouldn't work here because Venus as a symbol wouldn't work because it represents the beauty. It's like them still while this the female subject, female symbol, which is Venus, unlike this one, is quite male-centered too. What it represents is from female, from the view of male. So we don't have. Maybe I'll come up with something one day, or if you want to help me, you can help me. It can be represented through spiral or through circle in a circle. That it's not, meaning that it's not something like the pregnancy or subject in a subject or subject in a subject in a subject. The absence of self-sufficient subject and reaching out outside of itself and driven by a desire to appropriate something outside of itself. It's rather the process of disappearance. It's rather process of approaching its limit, self-destruction, and through it, generation, through this self-destruction. And it's not, there's no idea, there's no inside and outside. It's like everywhere. It's not separated. There is no boundaries that separate, no self-sufficiency that this male-centered symbol would represent. So it's just something completely different. And what is also important is that Freudian idea of a death drive the one he takes from Spielrein and tries to reappropriate, to make it part of his theory, and it doesn't fit there. One of the reasons I think that Freud fails to do so is because Freud death drive still subjective, because basic unit for Freud is a subject separated from other subjects who want to live and who want to survive and to attain a pleasure, even if the subject is failing. If you make death drive, take Spielreinian concept of death drive or death instinct and make it part of Freudian conception, put it inside the subject. The idea for death drive is kind of what is for me the most important in it. And the death drive is lost because it's initially intersubjective. It's not within the subject, it's in between subjects, is self-destructive for subject, but through the self-destruction connects with others. So it's not within the subject. Freud takes Spielrein intersubjective principle of the death drive and make it the quality of the subject, put it inside the circle, and which makes death drive lose its sense, like the most important thing about it. And this, if you take death drive as intersubjective principle and make it subjective, make it a quality of a Freudian subject that is self-enclosed and wants to attain pleasure, it just remains within the subject as something that subverts, doesn't let subject attain a pleasure, but it's still within. It's just the obstacle to pleasure principle. It like loses all its magic and all its power. In Spielrein, it's intersubjective, and we know that only recently Todd McGowan would be the one who would try to make death drive intersubjective again, and I'm kind of trying to do it too. So coming back to Spielreinian the concept of a death drive, making it intersubjective again. And for Spielrein, love and destruction would be just different shades and grades of self-destruction. It's also a completely different comprehension of love and sexuality. But let's talk more about love, because if for Freud it's more within the pleasure principle, and it's if it has the quality, if there is destruction to it, is the secondary characteristic, because it's initially not supposed to be destructive. It's supposed to be procreative and satisfying desires and all of that. If there is a quality of destruction there, it's like admixed the secondary thing. But for Spielrein, it is the thing. Sexuality and love is about self-destruction. It's not about that much procreation. Procreation or creation, it's rather effect or result of the destruction. And in Freud, sexuality would be at the center. This means at the center of his conception. And in Spielrein, I think it's appropriate to claim that the central is destruction. If she's talking about sexuality, I think it's because she's talking to Freud, and she wants to take in his terms, his comprehension, wants to reorient it towards her comprehension, making it, rather explaining it as a part of destruction. Because for Freud, sexuality was the basis. Like there is nothing underneath the, for example, the pleasure principle. It's not or sexuality. Sexuality is not in itself sublimation of anything. Sexuality is like the basis, basic drive, as a sexual drive. And Spielrein talks about sexuality, but claims that it's the already sublimation of something. It's not the pure basic cornerstone basic drive. It's already not sublimation, but form of destruction, way of manifesting destruction, as long as in line with other ways of manifesting destruction. And she would talk, this is the concept that Jung would take from her about the collective unconscious. But once again, in a similar way, I prefer Spielrein's original concept of the death drive, not Freudian one. And in a similar way, I would prefer Spielrein idea for we-psyche in comparison with Jungian idea of collective unconscious, which it's the similar, I would criticize Jungian way of reappropriating, taking Spielrein's original concept of we-psyche, of collective unconscious, and transforming it into, it undergoes similar process like death drive undergoes with the, somewhat similar with the death drive. It makes it too, not subjective, but it's about enclosed in, not in individual, but in a certain collective identity, even if it's the identity of humanity. Well, it doesn't matter, let's not talk about Jung, but for Spielrein, I is a selfhood, is more like illusionary, and what she talks about is the dimension of we-psyche, which is at the core, at the bottom of our eye. So when we look inside of ourselves, we discover the absence of ourself, we discover we-psyche. And this we-psyche is not the psyche, well, one can interpret it, and this is what Jung does, talking about this dimension as a psyche of particular group of individuals, even if it includes all humanity. In Spielrein, it's rather undifferentiated space of where separated I is absent. And it's quite similar to what Kristeva would later talk when she discusses women time, talking about the time of a history and primordial dimension of a women time, where there is no direction of a history, just the repetition, the dark undifferentiated space where the time line doesn't exist, which is at the core, at the heart of the historical time, the time of a culture and time of a progress. So this dark dimension of we psyche. And at the core of the death drive would be drive of, if you can call it drive, because it's not personal, it would be a rather calling of we, and for I it's self-destructive. And she would say that there is something in our depth which, as paradoxical as it may sound, wants this self-damaging. So this we at the core of our eyes, it doesn't care about our satisfaction, personal satisfaction, or desires. It's in relation to I, it's rather self-destruction. And this is where love occurs. It doesn't care about I. It's self-destructive. And the thing I wanted to discuss with you today is the Spielreinian practice, which I have no answers here yet, maybe just questions. This is the last part of my chapter, where I'm trying to discussing what Spielreinian practice, psychoanalytic practice, and I claim that it would be negative practice. What would it be like? Because if here I'm asking in this chapter, Freudian framework of Freudian psychoanalysis with a subject which is different from Spielreinian subject. The practice of Freud, which originated in alliance with his early theory, which doesn't include death drive yet. After Freud being influenced by Sabina, Spielrein includes a death drive in his comprehension, in his theory. It's not nonetheless, it's not included in a practice, and still practice of psychoanalysis would function wherever anything destructive is encountered. There is the aim of getting rid of it or overcoming it, because it's quite hard to imagine the opposite direction of psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis as such is the psychoanalysis for the subject that is represented by Mars. How to help this kind of a subject, how to elevate the suffering of the subject who has a desire who is separated from other, how to make it more self-sufficient, and how to elevate the troubles that the restriction of a culture has on the desire of the subject. So originally, until today, not only psychoanalysis, but any therapy is aimed to help this kind of subject. But what if, so the subject of the pleasure principle, we can say, or male subject. And I wonder what would what kind of practice would be if Spielrein would invent her own practice of psychoanalysis. And of course, Spielrein was practicing psychoanalysis, and among her patients was Piaget, for example, who undertook I think 8-month therapy with her. But he complained, I think, that she was like practicing normal psychoanalysis. She wasn't inventive in this space. She was doing what psychoanalysts would be doing, like following their protocol. And there is a reason to do so, not to be inventive, like to be professional. She wouldn't risk her status of psychoanalyst with her invention. So even if it was invention still in the field of Freudian psychoanalysis, because she was practicing Freudian psychoanalysis. She wasn't inventing her own. And question for me would be if she would risk her status of psychoanalyst, and if or the other way to put this question is if the subject of psychoanalysis would be her subject, which is completely different from Freudian subject. What kind of psychoanalysis, what kind of psychoanalytic practice would it be? And in the chapter, I claim at the end that this kind of negative practice not aimed at facilitating pleasure, but would deal with this self-destructive subject. It wouldn't be aimed at pursuit of pleasure, and instead it would engage with the destructiveness, since at the core of the subject, and interconnectedness, because destruction and interconnectedness are connected in Spielrein. And this wouldn't be practice of indifference, but rather practice of care. I imagine it maybe also the opposite, and no longer under the symbolic guidance of a father, but under the guidance of primordial mother, meaning the dimension of a we. And this idea of it contradicts, including it contradicts Freudian psychoanalysis and Lacanian psychoanalysis, because one of the points is that they all betray mother. Like mother is the dimension that mother represents, of feminine, not feminine, but maternal represents, is a dimension that one needs to overcome. It's like necessary thing in psychoanalysis. It's not only in psychoanalysis, but in psychology. What mother represents, the sacrifice, the non-individualized space, the space of sacrifice. It's what subject has to overcome, kind of under guidance of a father. In Lacan, you would need to enter a symbolic order, be autonomous subject, create yourself as autonomous, separated subject through language. And the other kind of practice, the practice that doesn't betray mother, is not under the guidance of a father, would be different. And the subject it would produce, even if there is aim of producing the subject there, it wouldn't be the subject of like the subject that ego psychology are aiming to produce, the successful, not sacrificing subject, but the image of a mother, the sacrificing, non-individualized subject, because we still, in our culture, in psychology, is something that helping this process. we aim, like the ideal is to create a successful separated subject, which means betraying the mother, not to be like your mother. The mother is seen here as something disgusting. It's even in Kristeva, she would talk about the objection, that mother has to, the body of the mother is something that has to be sacrificed. This has to be overcome. And what if it's not? What if it's the subject that we are creating, if it's even the subject in psychoanalysis or helping, is the kind of more as the mother, not separated from others, but practicing this self-sacrifice and interconnectedness with others. So it was more like a question than answer. If you have anything to add to this, I would be glad to hear you.
Hello.
Hi.
Everybody hear me? Hello. I think that the reduction of pain, as you say, always has the goal of attaining some significant type of happiness or pleasure behind it, and overcoming destruction only serves the goal in Freud's conception of the death drive of then removing an obstacle to pleasure. But you might even go a step further and say that a Freud's pleasure principle consists in nothing else except removing obstacles of unpleasure, and that there is in fact no actual positive aspect of pleasure to this sometimes, but that it's entirely a matter of, in Freud's economic language, of removing surplus tension of the organism, and that the pleasure exists only as lowering of tension. And Freud is extremely even pessimistic about, for instance, the pleasure that's ultimately afforded by sexual intercourse, because he says that it's merely a fleeting reduction of tension, which very quickly is replaced by more tension afterward, and doesn't actually lead to a long-lasting satisfaction or happiness of the ego itself, which will, as soon as the fleeting moment of orgasm is finished, find some other route to increase its tension again. So there's actually no positive pleasure, really. It's all just fighting the negative obstacles to pleasure, and that's partly considered to be the reason why Freud originally named the pleasure principle the unpleasure principle. And for a long time, he called it the unpleasure principle, because the unpleasure principle is entirely just about reducing tension. And that's how people came to interpret Freud as positing the death drive something close to a nirvana theory, because the theory of nirvana is that as death is a final release of all tension, it's the ultimate state of going beyond pleasure, as in the religious theory of nirvana. And I was wondering what your thoughts on this might be.
Thank you, Jake. Yeah, it's strange thing that people, whatever you talk about Sabina Spielrein, like, what's the point coming back to Freud? Like, what is this urge? Because we're more familiar with Freud, and like even saying something that what would be closer to her interpretation, it's already in Freud, that the pleasure principle, as we know it, is not actually the pleasure principle. It can be seen as including the death drive. It's not. And after all, once we forget about this discussion, we'll proceed to talk about Freud pleasure principle as excluding, like forgetting about this, it's just justifying Freud, saying that the pleasure principle is not actually pursuit of pleasure, but it's unattainable, it's already includes, it's already tragic. And it's kind of what which would mean that what I want to say, talking about Sabina Spielrein, and you claim it's already in Freud. Like, I know different forms of comprehension that one can find something similar interpretation, the negative interpretation in Freud. But just I don't understand why would one do it instead of it's easier abandoning Freud, and instead of going back to Freud every time and looking for tiny small details and discussing Freud, and but still being within the Freud. That's what I'm trying to avoid, and that's what Sabina Spielrein represents to me. Instead of different detail and arguing about different detail of what is pleasure principle in Freud, it's the something else that I want to, like, there is no space to breathe.
But I asked the question for Spielrein. I was wondering what Spielrein, what's in relation to the Nirvana principle is, because I don't know what Spielrein thinks, and I'm asking you so that you can enlighten me about what Spielrein thinks on the Nirvana principle. Is her death drive approaching a final release of all tension, or is her death drive like, is it a principle of finding release from pain, or is death drive a desire which wants to increase tension rather than decrease it? It's because it's hard to find very much published work, as you said, on Spielrein. Since I think that she was a woman, it's obvious that she would have already felt extremely privileged just to even be able to write to Freud, and that the idea of her imposing her own type of analysis as a system, she would have thought would have been too difficult due to the bars and restrictions placed upon women in reaching professional status as doctors at the time. So I appreciate and understand that Sabina Spielrein was a victim of a lot of feminine male dominance in her age.
Thank you, Jake. I think Nirvana principle, it's still tricky. Like, I don't care what she would say if she would ever talk about it, but the way I see it, it's still operating in Freud, for example, who takes it from Schopenhauer, who takes it from Buddhism. But in Freud, like everything else, it's still operating on the level of subject, level of I, is the I that want, or the everything else to actually approach in the state of inorganic matter, wanting to disappear. But it's still the desire of the I, and what Spielrein adds is the dimension of a we, that it also exists in Freud, like collective unconscious in some way, in different way from Jung. But the Nirvana is not for him, like it's more about I, not the desire of I not to exist, maybe. And it has to do nothing with unconscious, with the collective unconscious. Unlike for Spielrein, it would rather operate, rather this destruction would operate on the dimension of we-psyche. And the we-psyche is the most important, one of the most important things in relation to the death instinct, is one of the most important things she introduces. So the Nirvana in Freud, his comprehension of the death drive through this concept, and his unpleasure principle, which was initial term for pleasure principle, they don't reach still what I think what Sabina Spielrein was able to reach. Like, it's not the shift of perspective, it's still within the subject, something happening in a subject. And in Spielrein, no matter how you improve and redirect in a negative way Freudian concept, I think she introduces, or at least this has potential to introduce, the different dimension that like opens up something else which Freud didn't open up because of his perspective. All right, sorry, Matt, it's your turn.
No, yeah, I'm just blown away here by the whole we-psyche thought, and the word destruction, almost you equate it almost with, I think, with assimilation and yearning. Assimilate, the destruction is the yearning to assimilate the I into the we, right? And this just seems like fantastic new notion to me, and and I also thought we could make our own hats, like make death drive intersubjective again. That would be good here in America. But anyway, joke. Yeah. So thank you for the we, and I think we have a lot of discussion probably ahead on that subject, because I don't think anyone really has talked about that I observed. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, the idea of a we is quite important because it's quite hard to comprehend, because it goes against the idea of a subject as desiring subject. And this is the normal perspective of how we comprehend ourselves. Like I claim that we are all suicidal, and once in a while at least, and it's not unconscious, it's the conscious understanding of, I don't want it anymore, I'm fed up with everything. And we all have in some way consciously those thoughts, just we prefer to avoid them, like not to notice them, and not to alienate those thoughts from ourselves, seeing them as not ours, and use the perspective of a desire. What do we want? What is outside of ourselves that we want to attain, to appropriate? And this is how we comprehend. This is the process that is going on. What do I want? It's like very important to figure out what you want outside of yourself and build this progress of life, successful life. And also we all know that we need to be self-sufficient and build some kind of a career, or participate in competition with others. Like this is the perspective that we use to comprehend ourselves. And the other things that we can encounter in ourselves, like the suicidal ideation, and that we just prefer not to notice, like through the lens that we are appropriating to comprehend ourselves, it just doesn't fit. Therefore, once we encounter it in ourselves, we just see it as a deviation. It's just not us. Other people don't have it. It's not supposed to happen. Psychoanalysis, psychotherapy would aim to facilitate the idea of this first normal subject with desires outside, with wanting something, with the self-sufficiency and stuff, like ego psychology, boost your ego and self-esteem or something like it, of find what you want, what inspires you, even find a meaning. Meaning is kind of better. But what if one will construct the idea of a subject, the Spielreinian subject, or the way I see Spielreinian subject, with this we-psyche inside, and not desiring to self-sacrifice, because the death drive doesn't work, death instinct doesn't work in a similar way like this, the other kind of desire. There is something outside of you, you want to reach it, you get in it, yeah, you're happy for a while until you're not. But it's not the desire meaning of the subject separate from the other, the desire outside of the subject that you need to go and get. This is, so love in Freud, this is something like love based on sexuality. There is object of desire outside, you need to go get it, appropriate it, female body, for example, and satisfy your desire. This is the love in Freud, in this comprehension. In Spielrein, love, you're not separated. Love, object of love, there is no object of love outside of you that you need to go get, be successful, satisfy your desire. It's thing that is happening not even within you, but in between people, that is destructive to people, or to like something that participates in the love relationship, is the structure that occurs. And that's why I'm trying to call death drive a calling. It's calling from outside longing. It's not the desire you need to satisfy, driving you somewhere. It's process. It's not even internal. It's where internal coincides with external. It's self-destructive, but not only in relation to I. It's like this massive destruction going on, universal, that you participate rather in it. And yes, it destroys you, but it's also this destruction that is going on. It results in creation, not as a stage, but creation is rather the tiny piece of the general destruction, something like this. So it's And it's interesting, this is we-psyche, that it's not the collection of psyches that are separate from each other, they just merge at some level. It's the we as in opposition to I, in opposition to separation. It's the absence of differentiation, undifferentiation, not the collection of I, but the absence of differentiated I, so any type of differentiation. And it's just interesting to think of the practice that would facilitate this kind of it's not even a subject, but the Spielreinian thing that is going on, instead of what we have now as aiming at successful subjects. I would maybe call it a school of mothering or something like it, because mother is seen as not human enough, as someone not individualized, someone you're not supposed to be. Like, to be contemporary good subject, successful person, you need to be the opposite of a mother. The opposite mother, what is mother is associated with sacrificing, not fully human, even the subject, subhuman, not good quality human, not individualized, has no personality, sacrificing, doesn't live her own life. And the ideal type of a human being, the successful, which is obviously male-centered perspective, the successful someone independent from others. This is what psychology aims to build and to facilitate. And for me, like, we all comprehend this kind of subject which mother embody as someone disgusting, not good enough, that you need to change and work on yourself and be self-sufficient or something like it. Stop sacrificing yourself. For me, I think it's even more disgusting, the subject that psychology tries to attain, the separated from others, successful, because success is always presupposes that someone is less successful. And individualization is always also an expense of betraying someone else who is sacrificing for you. So they're both maybe disgusting, but I would prefer, I think, the formation of the subject, the caring subject, self-sacrificing subject, instead of subject non-caring and just successful. Okay. Yes, and is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a very nice and interesting thought. I just want to point out something I've thought of when you say about the school of mothering, because in the current parlance with the Gen Z audience, when you say someone is mothering, it's like giving the vibe of an ultimate kind of self-sacrifice and love. So it's just a very interesting connection that I saw. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm.
It's quite problematic to propagate this kind of subject, self-sacrificing subject, and not fully existing. It's like opposite of Ayn Rand, but because it means that there is someone who you're serving to, other people, successful, and who are not sacrificing in return. So it has its problematic sides. It only works if no one is manipulating the other sacrifice, where each are equally sacrificing. But unfortunately, I don't think it's attainable, because once you start to sacrifice, there is someone who will appropriate your sacrifice and be successful and expensive. So for now, it makes sense when the subject is like, when we protect our boundaries and we are not trying not to sacrifice ourselves. Like, it does make sense, but yeah. All right.
That is selfless service, though. That is service, sacrificing, serving without expectation that yourself will be benefiting or preserved even.
Mhm.
Selfless service.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Jake, do you want to give turn to Paul? because it was just second time.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so I was, yeah, thanks for the talk, by the way. So I was just trying to imagine what Spielrein's kind of intersubjective death drive, what form it might take, what it looks like. So would an example of things like war, you've talked about war before and death drive and war. So would you see something like the collective self-sacrifice of, say, people going to war and dying for a higher cause? Is that what you're talking about, or is that still in the kind of Freudian fold? So that's really just still a kind of subjective, egoistic desire. So there's a conscious recognition that you're, say, dying for your country, but that's really in relation to the thing. Or is that maybe more of an example of an intersubjective thing, and therefore, if it does it have an ethical dimension? Does that kind of self-sacrifice going through war? So in some respects, it's a good thing. It does have an ethical dimension to it in terms of the death drive having an ethical dimension in that sense.
Thank you, Paul. Well, of course, I want death drive to be everything good and the pleasure principle to be everything bad. That's why I'm interpreting war as the pleasure principle, just because I don't like it, because it's convenient. But of course, it's problematic. The other problem is aggression for me. Like, I would also see it as not death drive, because I like death drive and I don't like depression. But I see that it's problematic. So, and based on this, there are a couple of tricks one can use to show how war is not death drive, not intersubjective death drive. It's not participation in a we-psyche of sacrifice, because actual sacrifice mean sacrifice for nothing, like participate, not attaining, not appropriating anything in result of the, and war as Todd McGowan would talk about war, and Bataille would talk about war as, for Bataille, there is a sacred war that is inside of you, it's self-destructive and for nothing, but you kind of, through this sacred war, for Bataille, you participate in self-destructive universe. That's the war that is going on, the sacred war. And the profane war, the war that we're witnessing in the historical political field, for Bataille would be, and he was witnessing the war, and that's where he's thinking about the war is coming from. But those wars are not good wars for Bataille, because it's still self-destruction, redirection of this self-destruction into otherness, and like aiming to stop it, to arrest it. And Todd McGowan would talk about wars as, or maybe aggression too, as trying to, through destruction of others, you try to put a limit on this destruction, so limit the destruction or control the destruction, and appropriate, for example, certain territory, so get something in return. And if it's sacrifice, the sacred something, you're not supposed to get anything in return. But again, those are all just tricks to, because I don't want death drive. I'm looking for ways how to death drive and interconnectedness seen through perspective of death drive, not to be associated with the war, which is the most immediate association. Because otherwise we have, one of the reasons I'm doing it, except for I just wanted to be everything good and not associated with everything bad, but we just have this idea, either we all separated, not self-sacrificing, as existing in a rational relationship to each other, giving as much as only as much as we're getting in return of the ideal subject, the ideal society that we imagine. Or there is this crazy thing, war, self-sacrifice, patriotic self-sacrifice to a country, the absence of a subject which is autonomous. That's all we have. And of course, this horrible thing, the one where we're serving to the country, sacrificing ourselves, and it's tempting to associate it with death drive because it makes sense. And I would be looking for something else, so the opposite of neoliberal subject, all successful and given only as much as you're given back, not sacrificing oneself at all, and something different from the self-sacrifice as a way of sacrificing for something, for like bigger cause, like Russia, for example, the most horrible cause to sacrifice oneself to. So something different, and that they're both male-centered, like this autonomous subject, male-centered perspective, the male subject, and the self-sacrificing yourself to a god to become better some subject, or get salvation in return, for example, or sacrifice yourself to a country and get also some kind of glory in return. It's also male subject progressing to better ethical morality. And the female subject, if it's a subject or lesser, it's intersubjectivity, which feminist ethics try kind of is directed to intersubjectivity instead of formation of a good subject, is the work of carrying intersubjective perspective. So it's not neoliberal autonomous subject, is not the moral religious self-sacrificing subject, is different kind of sacrifice. It's not subject getting better, improving itself, going to heaven because it's so good and there is no sin. It's more about interconnectedness, and where no one is good. There is no subject that is good in return. Yay, now you're good enough, you get salvation. It just the feminist ethics is more about relationship, the quality of relationship, the caring relationship. It doesn't matter who is good. You know, we're just always trying to this interconnectivity operates and always failing to be good. No one is going to be safe. You know, there is nothing you can do to attain salvation. There is no salvation anyway.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. Yeah,
Different mythology kind of behind it.
okay.
Yes, Jake.
If feminism rewrites the mythology of how society dictates who are winners and who are losers, would this like turn around the concept of loser? So if we say that somebody else is a social loser, this makes ourselves a loser as well, because we're interconnected to them through our intersociality, and reflection upon them not winning is also a reflection upon us, not interconnected and not caring for them.
Thank you, Jake. I actually think that well, feminism is problematic. The way feminist philosophy is problematic with its origin, because it's quite male-centered. Surprisingly, if you take Simone de Beauvoir, the ideal for her is a woman as good as a man. She would talk about necessity of autonomous female subject that would be equal to autonomous male subject. So they're aiming at equality of autonomous subjects. So for the way feminism originates is trying to make, in this regard, existentialistics, for example, feminism would be trying to make another man out of woman, which means sacrificing also meaning, and some radical feminism would be seen idea of, so it's also the idea of success, right? The woman seen as a loser, supposed to transform, be more like male subject, so to be a winner. And the feminism I'm talking about is rather there's all losers in this respect. There is no such thing as autonomous subject and the winner in this. It's not even competition of winning and losing. If one wants to use the term, it's rather only keeping the idea of losing, never winning. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks.
I will stop recording now. If Chris, do you want to be recorded? Okay, I'll stop recording now and I'll ask those